My parents beat me in front of my daughter for not paying my sister's rent, and I made sure they regret every single second of it. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to tell a story like this. But here we are. My name is Rachel, I'm 33 years old, and I'm raising my 8-year-old daughter Emily on my own. I work hard, I pay my bills, and I make sure my little girl has a safe and stable home. But in my parents' eyes, none of that has ever been enough. To them, I exist to fix everyone else's mistakes, especially my younger sister Madison's. Madison is 28 and hasn't held down a job longer than a few months. She hops from apartment to apartment, blowing through rent money on clothes, vacations, or nights out with her friends. Every time she runs short, my parents swoop in, not to help her, but to demand that I cover the gap. They say it's my duty as the older sister. I've lost track of how many times I've bailed her out. Her college tuition? I paid for most of it. Her first car? I co-signed the loan, and when she stopped making payments, I covered those too. Rent? At least 6 times in the last few years. But this time, I had nothing left to give. Madison was 2 months behind on her rent, facing eviction, and my parents called me like it was already decided. Rachel, you'll cover it. Madison is family. She needs you. I told them no. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. I'm not doing this anymore. I have Emily to think about. Madison is an adult. She needs to grow up and handle her own life. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then came the anger. My mother's voice turned sharp. You're selfish, Rachel. Do you want your sister on the street? My father added. You've always thought you're better than everyone else. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us. I wanted to scream back, but Emily was sitting beside me at the kitchen table, coloring quietly. I bit my tongue and repeated. I said no. Stop asking me. The call ended with threats. My mother shouting that I'd regret turning my back on family. I tried to brush it off, but the knot in my stomach only grew. I thought maybe they'd cool down and realize I meant what I said. I was wrong. Later that evening, just as Emily and I were settling in for dinner, there was a pounding on my door. My parents had come straight over. I opened it a crack, hoping to avoid a scene, but they pushed their way inside. Their faces were red with fury. What kind of daughter refuses her own sister? My mom spat. What kind of example are you setting for Emily? I told them again that I wasn't paying. Madison's choices weren't my responsibility. That was all it took. My mother's hand came flying across my face before I even registered what was happening. The sting burned hot on my cheek. My father shoved me back, shouting that I was a disgrace. Emily screamed, running to me, clinging to my arm. Stop! Leave my mommy alone, she cried, but they didn't listen. My mom shoved Emily aside like she was an obstacle in the way, and something inside me broke. I hit the floor, my lips split, my daughter sobbing into my shoulder while my parents stood over me, spewing words I'll never forget. You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back when you realize we're all you've got. When they finally stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook, I sat on the floor holding Emily. Her little body trembled against mine, and I tasted blood on my tongue. I knew one thing for certain. They thought they could humiliate me forever, but they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. That night, I promised myself this would be the last time anyone laid a hand on me or humiliated me in front of my daughter. They wanted me to regret saying no? No, they would regret underestimating. The knock never came. It was the kind of pounding that rattled the doorframe, sharp and angry, as though the wood itself had done something wrong. Before I could even reach the handle, the door flew open. My parents stepped inside without permission, their faces tight with rage. Rachel, my mother snapped. Enough of this nonsense. Madison is your blood. You don't turn your back on family. I stayed where I was, between them and the living room, steadying my voice even though my heart pounded. I said no. I meant it. My father's voice thundered. Selfish. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us. I'm not doing it, I repeated, firmer this time. Not anymore. The air shifted, tense and electric. Then it broke. My mother's palm struck my cheek with such force that the sound echoed through the room. I staggered, the heat blooming across my skin before I even registered the pain. Ungrateful girl, she hissed. Before I could find words, my father's hand shoved hard against my shoulder, knocking me off balance. You've always thought you were better than this family, he barked. Emily's voice pierced the chaos, shrill and terrified. Stop! Leave her alone. She rushed forward, tiny arms outstretched as though she could protect me with her small body. Move! My mother shouted, pushing her aside. Emily stumbled and nearly fell, her eyes wide with shock. That was the moment something inside me broke. It wasn't just anger or pain. It was the heavy, crushing realization that they didn't see me as their daughter, and they didn't see Emily as their granddaughter. To them, we were obstacles in the way of Madison's comfort. The sting on my cheek deepened as blood touched my lip. I sank down to the floor, my legs giving way beneath me. Emily was instantly there, wrapping herself around me, sobbing against my chest. I held her tight, trying to steady both of us while my parents loomed above. "You'll regret this," my father snarled, pointing a finger at me like a curse. "You'll come crawling back," my mother added, her voice dripping with contempt. Then they turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shuddered. The silence they left behind was deafening. I sat there on the floor, Emily trembling in my arms, the metallic taste of blood sharp on my tongue. Their footsteps faded, but their words lingered like poison in the air. Emily whispered through her tears, "Mommy, are you okay?" I couldn't answer right away. My lip throbbed, my cheek burned, but none of that compared to the crack inside my chest. They hadn't just struck me, they'd torn away the last shred of illusion I'd been clinging to, that maybe deep down they cared. I pulled Emily closer, rocking her gently, and let the tears fall silently down my face. I had no strength left for anything else. But as I held my daughter, one thought burned hotter than the pain. Whatever came next, I would make sure she never had to stand in front of them again. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel fear when I thought of my parents. I felt resolve. The house was still, the air heavy after the storm that had ripped through it. Emily's small body trembled as I held her close, her sobs muffled against my chest. I whispered soft words, rubbing her back, trying to convince her that she was safe now. Inside, though, I felt anything but calm. Her wide, tear-streaked eyes told me the damage was deeper than bruises or cuts. What she had witnessed couldn't be unseen. I brushed the hair back from her face, kissed her forehead, and promised quietly, "I've got you. I won't let them hurt you again." Saying it aloud made something inside me click into place. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about protecting Emily from the very people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. As I sat there rocking her, pieces of the past began flashing through my mind, sharp and uninvited. The patterns had always been there, hadn't they? Madison stumbled, and I picked her up. Madison broke rules, and I paid the price. From the time we were little, she was shielded, while I was the one held responsible. I remembered standing beside her as a teenager when she got caught shoplifting. My parents scolded me for not watching her better, as if I were her mother. Then came college. She dropped out of her first program, blamed everyone but herself, and my parents demanded I pay for her second try. I worked double shifts, scraped together what I could, while she partied away the semester. When she wanted a car, they told me it would teach me responsibility, to help her get one. I co-signed, and when she stopped paying, the collectors came after me. Each memory layered over the last until the weight of them pressed hard against my chest. How many times had I told myself it would be the last? How many times had I believed my parents when they said I was doing the right thing, being the good daughter? Emily's small fingers clung to my sleeve, pulling me back to the present. Her innocence didn't deserve to be wrapped up in this cycle of blame and favoritism. The thought of her growing up believing she was less important than Madison, or worse, that she should accept cruelty for the sake of family, made my stomach turn. I realized then that this wasn't the first betrayal. It was simply the clearest. The slap, the shove, the sight of my daughter being pushed aside. Those moments ripped the blindfold away. Every favor I had done, every sacrifice I had made, had led to this. And it had to end here. I kissed Emily's hair and whispered again, more for myself than for her. "It's going to be different now." My cheek still stung, my lip was swollen, but underneath the pain was something sharper, cleaner. For years I had carried the weight of being the responsible one, the dependable one, the one they could always drain without question. Not anymore. I looked around the quiet room, Emily finally beginning to relax in my arms, and I knew with absolute certainty that the decision had already been made. I wasn't going to explain myself again. I wasn't going to bend under guilt, threats, or tears. This was the breaking point, the line in the sand. I tightened my hold on my daughter, drew in a steady breath, and spoke the truth I had swallowed for too long. "Enough," I said softly but firmly. "I'm done being the family's punching bag." The next morning, I let the phone ring until it went silent. I wasn't ready to hear their voices, not after what had happened. Days passed that way. Calls from numbers I knew by heart flashed across the screen, but I refused to answer. For the first time in my life, I cut off all contact. It felt strange, unsettling, but also like the only way forward. Then came Madison. Her number lit up the phone late one evening. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Her voice shot through the line, high-pitched and furious. "Do you realize what you've done? I'm about to get thrown out of my apartment because of you." I held the phone tight, my knuckles white. "That's not on me. You need to deal with your own choices." "You're heartless," she spat. "A real sister wouldn't leave me to suffer." "I'm not your safety net anymore," I told her flatly. Then I ended the call. It didn't stop there. Soon, both of my parents left voicemails, one after another, stacking up like bricks. My father's voice was full of anger. "You've abandoned your duty to this family." My mother's was sharper. dripping with guilt. We raised you better than this. Madison needs you, and you're letting her down. I deleted every message, but the words stayed lodged in my mind like splinters. One night, as I ended another heated call, I noticed Emily standing in the doorway. She must have heard more than I realized. Her little brow furrowed as she asked quietly, "Mommy, why don't they love you like they love Aunt Madison?" Her question pierced me deeper than any insult. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of years of favoritism crashing down all at once. She wasn't supposed to see that, wasn't supposed to feel the imbalance that had shaped my entire life. I knelt down and cupped her face, forcing a steady smile I didn't feel. "Sweetheart, I love you more than anything in this world. And that's what matters." She nodded, but her eyes held a sadness no child should carry. That look lit something fierce inside me. It was no longer just about me standing up for myself. It was about making sure Emily grew up knowing her worth, knowing her mother's strength. She would never think love meant being treated like a doormat. As I tucked her into bed that night, I whispered a promise under my breath, more vow than comfort. They would never again have the power to make her see me as small. "They'll never make you believe your mom is weak," I said softly, stroking her hair as she drifted off. And I meant every word. I learned quickly that ignoring them wouldn't be enough. Cutting off calls, deleting voicemails, and avoiding family gatherings only slowed the storm. It didn't stop it. Their voices still slipped into my life like smoke under a closed door. I could feel it in every angry message, every accusation they hurled through voicemail, every demand that echoed in my head. If I didn't act, they would keep circling, waiting for the chance to drag me back under. So I made a choice. Instead of running from the fire, I started collecting. Each voicemail was saved, every text locked away in a folder. I didn't just listen anymore, I recorded. Their anger became evidence, each word a brick in the wall I was building between us. Late at night, after Emily was asleep, I spread papers across the kitchen table. Old bank statements, receipts, transfers. All proof of how many times I had stepped in when no one else did. Tuition payments that weren't mine but I had covered. Loan payments where my name was listed as the guarantor. Checks for rent that left my account but never came back. Line after line, it painted a story I had been living blindfold. A story where I was the one footing the bill while they stood by, silent, letting it happen. Then I found the cracks in Madison's stories. She had cried about overdue rent, about barely scraping by. Yet there were pictures tucked into old emails, confirmations for flights, charges for hotel rooms, designer labels bought during the same months she begged for help. I could almost hear her laughter in those purchases, the carefree way she lived while I broke myself trying to clean up her messes. Piece by piece, I built a record of the truth. It wasn't about money, it was about patterns. Years of sacrifice on my side, years of indulgence on hers, and years of manipulation from the two people who should have protected me instead of tearing me down. The anger that once shook me now settled into something quieter, sharper. Determination. I no longer felt like a daughter trying to win approval. I felt like someone finally preparing to turn the light on in a dark room. I watched Emily sleep one night, her small hands curled beneath her cheek, her breathing soft and steady. That little face reminded me of why I had to keep pushing. She deserved a life free of their poison, and I deserved the dignity they had denied me for so long. I leaned close and whispered, almost to myself but just loud enough for her to stir slightly. "They think I'm powerless. Watch me show them what power really looks like." It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day when I should have been focused on projects and meetings. The office buzzed with the usual rhythm, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the low hum of conversation. I was halfway through answering an email when the glass doors swung open with a force that made everyone turn. There they were, my parents on either side, Madison in the middle, marching toward me like an angry procession. My stomach tightened, but I didn't move. I slipped my phone into my palm and tapped the record button. "Rachel," Madison's voice carried through the room. "You've ruined everything. Do you even care that I'm about to lose my home?" Heads lifted from cubicles. My co-workers exchanged uneasy glances. I stayed seated, spine straight, fingers resting calmly on the desk. "You're pathetic," my father barked. "Sitting here pretending you're successful while your own sister suffers. What kind of person does that?" "You've always been a disappointment," my mother added, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "All that pride, and for what? Look at you, heartless, cold, selfish." Their words echoed against the walls, bouncing from one stunned face to another. Madison's voice rose higher, her anger spilling into shrieks. "I'm getting thrown out because of you. Everyone should know what kind of monster you are." I could feel every eye in the office on me, waiting for me to crack, to shrink under the weight of their fury. But I didn't. I let them stand there, their voices climbing louder, their accusations tumbling over one another until they sounded less like reason and more like chaos. One of my colleagues shifted uncomfortably near the copier. Another whispered, "Is this really happening?" The scene was ugly, undeniable, and every second of it was being captured by the quiet glow of my phone screen. My parents threw insults like stones. Madison's face twisted in rage. They were so consumed by their performance that they never noticed I hadn't spoken a word. Inside, I felt strangely calm. For years, I had absorbed their attacks in silence, shrinking to make room for their anger. But now, their cruelty wasn't just mine to carry. The walls of this office, the witnesses all around, and the recording in my hand, all of it would stand as proof. At last, when Madison's voice cracked from screaming, I stood. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't even look them in the eye. I pushed my chair back, slid the phone into my pocket, and walked past them without a word. Behind me, their shouting stumbled into confusion, their voices chasing after me as I reached the hallway. But it didn't matter anymore. I had what I needed. Every bitter word, every accusation, every ounce of venom, all captured in the open. They thought they'd come to break me. Instead, they had just given me undeniable evidence of exactly who they were. And I walked away while they were still ranting, their voices fading into the background like the last echoes of a storm. Nights turned into weeks as I organized everything I had gathered. The recordings sat in neat folders, each one labeled by date. Voicemails were saved, transcribed, and placed alongside bank statements, receipts, and transfers. Line after line, the story unfolded with painful clarity. Years of sacrifice on my part, years of indulgence on Madison's. I wasn't just holding a pile of papers anymore. I was holding the truth, and it was time someone else saw it. One Saturday afternoon, I reached out to my relatives, the ones my parents always bragged to, the ones who only ever heard one version of the story. Aunts who'd been told I was cold, uncles who believed Madison was fragile, cousins who thought my parents were saints. I invited them to meet at my place, no excuses. When they arrived, I didn't bother with small talk. I set the folders on the table and pressed play on one of the recordings. My mother's voice filled the room, shrill and unrelenting, calling me names that made my own cheeks burn even as I sat among family. Then came my father's growl, followed by Madison's shrieks, each word dripping with entitlement. The silence in the room was heavy when I stopped the playback. I slid the financial documents across the table, tuition bills, loan statements, rent transfers. My handwriting appeared again and again on checks, my signature on contracts, my bank account drained for expenses that were never mine. Eyes widened, brows furrowed. No one spoke at first. Then one cousin whispered, "You covered all of this? And they made it sound like you abandoned them." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. This is what's been happening for years. They made me the villain to protect Madison. But the truth is right here. A shift rippled through the room. The aunts exchanged looks. One uncle shook his head slowly, muttering, "I can't believe they lied to us." By the time I finished, the room was buzzing with outrage. Anger no longer pointed at me, but at the ones who had built their image on deceit. My relatives left that day carrying more than paper. They carried the weight of revelation. Within a week, the ripple turned into a wave. Support that had once flowed freely toward Madison dried up overnight. No more loans, no more pity. Calls that used to be sympathetic turned cold. Invitations stopped coming. My parents' pedestal crumbled as whispers spread through the family. And then, of course, Madison found her voice again. My phone lit up with her name, and before I could silence it, her scream tore through the speaker. "You destroyed me, bitch. Do you hear me? You ruined everything." Her fury didn't sting this time. It almost sounded desperate. I listened just long enough to catch her rage, then pressed the block button with a calmness that surprised even me. For the first time in years, the silence that followed felt like peace. The backlash didn't take long. Stripped of sympathy, my parents grew more vicious. The phone rang with new numbers, each message dripping with guilt or threat. "You're tearing this family apart," my mother. "We'll take you to court if we have to," my father snarled. They tried every angle, pleading one day, menacing the next. But I wasn't the same woman who used to cave at the sound of their voices. Every word, every attempt was documented. I saved voicemails, printed transcripts, filed dates and times. When they threatened lawsuits, I consulted an attorney. She reviewed the evidence carefully and told me what I already suspected. If they kept it up, I had enough to pursue a restraining order. For once, the law would be on my side. That knowledge steadied me like armor. Word of their behavior spread beyond family. Old neighbors, church acquaintances, even family friends who had once admired them began to whisper. Some were brave enough to say it aloud. "How could you lay hands on your own daughter? And in front of your granddaughter?" Their polished image cracked, and the more they tried to defend themselves, the worse they looked. Meanwhile, Madison's unraveling hit a breaking point. Without help from me, without cousins ready to step in, her eviction became reality. Bags and boxes piled in front of her old apartment, she slunk back to the only place left, our parents' house. At first, they welcomed her as the martyr in their story, but the facade didn't last. The fight started quickly. Bills went unpaid, voices raised behind closed doors, arguments spilling into the street. Neighbors who used to nod politely now watched with disapproval as shouting matches rattled the walls. The home that once served as their stage for superiority turned into a cage of resentment. While their world spiraled, mine found calm. Emily no longer jumped at sudden noises. Bedtime came easier, her sleep unbroken by nightmare. We filled evenings with small joys, baking cookies, reading stories, laughing at silly shows. Each ordinary moment felt like a miracle compared to the chaos we had left behind. One afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with crayons scattered around her. She hummed softly as she drew, her little tongue sticking out in concentration. When she finished, she held up the paper proudly. It was a picture of two figures holding hands under a bright sun. Just the two of us. This is our family now, she said simply. I felt tears well up, but they weren't heavy tears. They were light, cleansing. I pulled her into my arms and whispered, "Yes, baby. This is our family." And in that moment, I knew we were free. The text messages had been relentless all morning. Rachel's phone buzzed nonstop with desperate pleas, each more frantic than, "You have to fix this. Take Madison, Indiana. Do the right thing," her parents demanded, their words dripping with guilt and expectation. Rachel stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, the confrontation she knew was inevitable. Finally, she typed a single line, "I'll meet once." Neutral place. The cafe they had agreed upon was quiet, tucked away on a side street. Rachel arrived early, letting herself breathe before facing them. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, the way her heartbeat echoed in her ears. When they walked in, her parents' eyes were wild, darting between her and the little girl clutching her hand. Madison's small fingers wrapped tightly around Rachel's, and Rachel squeezed back, silently promising protection. Her parents' faces were pale, a mixture of anger, fear, and expectation. "Rachel," her father began, his voice shaking with controlled outrage. "You can't just. You want me to fix everything," Rachel interrupted, her tone calm but unyielding. She met their gaze squarely, refusing to let her voice waver. "You lost me the second you laid hands on me in front of my child." The words landed heavily, a line drawn in the sand. For a moment, the cafe seemed to still, the world narrowing to the three of them. Her mother's lips parted as if to respond, but nothing coherent came out. Her father's jaw tightened, and a vein pulsed at his temple. The anger in their eyes was palpable, but Rachel didn't flinch. She had rehearsed this, steeled herself for the inevitable outburst, and nothing they could say would undo the damage already done. Then it came, the torrent. Words, accusations, insults hurled across the small space. "You ungrateful, after everything we've done. You think you're better than us. How dare you?" Rachel stayed rooted in place, arms folded, eyes locked on theirs. Each insult bounced off her, meaningless against the wall of resolve she had built over months of pain and betrayal. She did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. Emily sat nearby, watching with wide eyes, her small body trembling in anticipation and awe. In that moment, she saw a side of her mother she had never witnessed so clearly, fierce, unbroken, and unwavering. Rachel's strength was a quiet force, radiating outward, making the chaos around them feel insignificant. Emily's heart swelled with pride. This was the woman who had fought for her, protected her, and now stood before her parents with an unshakable dignity. The confrontation stretched, tense and relentless, but Rachel had already made her decision. No compromise, no negotiation, no justification would sway her parents. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. And though they shouted, though their faces contorted with rage, she remained calm, unyielding. Finally, she stepped back, releasing Emily's hand just enough to signal movement, without letting go of her protective grip. Without a backward glance, Rachel walked toward the door. The cafe's quiet returned as she pushed it open, leaving the storm of words and shattered expectations behind. She did not look back. Every step away from them was a step toward safety, toward freedom, toward the life she had fought to preserve for herself and her daughter. Outside, the sun hit her face. She inhaled deeply, feeling the tension in her chest loosen, the weight of their anger falling away. Emily's small hand squeezed hers again, and Rachel smiled, quiet but full of relief. They walked forward together, leaving behind the chaos of a family fractured beyond repair, stepping into a future built on courage, strength, and unwavering love. Months had passed since that fateful confrontation. The heavy weight of anger and fear that once clung to Rachel had finally begun to lift, replaced with a quiet sense of purpose. Her days were no longer consumed by turmoil or frantic messages. Instead, they were filled with Emily's laughter, the warmth of their small home, and the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt on her own terms. Rachel had learned to cherish the simple routines, the small victories that had once gone unnoticed. Mornings were now bright and unhurried, filled with the scent of brewing coffee and the soft hum of music that Emily loved. They would sit together at the kitchen table, planning the day, talking about school, or simply enjoying the comfort of being together. In these moments, Rachel felt a profound sense of belonging, not to the family that had betrayed her, but to the life she had fought to protect. Meanwhile, her parents' world had become starkly different. Isolation had settled over them like an uninvited shadow. Madison, once bright-eyed and full of potential, carried a bitterness that no comfort could soothe. She had become wary of the people around her, distrustful, her youth marred by witnessing a fracture that couldn't be mended. The extended family, once eager to gather under one roof, now kept their distance. Rumors of their cruelty had spread, leaving them with no allies, no visitors, only whispers of judgment and quiet disapproval. Rachel heard of it only in passing, a word here, a rumor there, but she did not dwell on it. There was no satisfaction in their suffering, no sense of gloating. The revenge she had sought, the confrontation that had seemed so necessary, had never been about inflicting pain. It had been about reclaiming herself, standing tall for her child, and refusing to be diminished. She had drawn a line, and she had crossed it not with malice, but with dignity. Every day, that clarity settled more firmly in her heart. She could now see the contrast vividly. Her home, once a place of tension, was now a sanctuary filled with trust and warmth. Theirs, once a place of control, was hollow, governed by shame and regret. She did not gloat. She simply continued to live, and in doing so, she had already won. Afternoons often found Rachel and Emily side by side in the kitchen, a familiar chaos of flour, dough, and laughter. Emily's small hands moved clumsily, smearing chocolate on the counter, while Rachel guided her with gentle patience. Their laughter mingled, echoing off the walls, filling the quiet spaces of their home with a freedom Rachel had never known in her own childhood. Every giggle was a reminder of what she had protected and what she had gained. These were the moments that mattered, not the bitterness of the past, not the consequences her parents faced, but the serenity and love she had carved out for herself and Emily. Here, in the safe cocoon of their home, Rachel felt peace in its truest form. She could look back, not with triumph over their downfall, but with quiet satisfaction that she had chosen herself, her child, and her dignity over the toxic expectations they had imposed. And so, as the oven timer dinged and Emily's laughter rang through the kitchen once more, Rachel smiled. Their lives were simple now, free of manipulation and fear. Every shared smile, every little victory, was proof that they were no longer trapped by the past. They were free. Finally, fully, undeniably free. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away from my parents, or should I have given them another chance? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.